Did you get bullied in the schoolyard and dismiss it as part of growing up?
I think they need to know that this is a serious problem with lifelong consequences. It's not a trivial rite of passage.
Schools take bullying seriously, in part by reinforcing good behavior.
We run a very strong PBIS program, and PBIS stands for Positive Behavior Intervention School-Wide System. And we really try to capitalize on catching our students making great choices. We really try to create a culture where we are going to focus on the positive things that you do, and we're going to reward you for that.
Bringing bullying to an end at school, in cyberspace, in society. It's Arizona Week.
Production of Arizona Week is made possible in parts by a grant from the Stonewall Foundation and by the members of Arizona Public Media. Thank you for your continued support. Once again, your moderator, Michael Chiha.
October is National Bullying Prevention Month, and to mark it, we see how one school works on prevention, talk to a cyberbullying expert, and hear about other efforts in the community. First, Arizona Week reporter intern Samantha-Jo Roth briefs us on the topic. Thanks for being on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
You've been doing this research for a couple weeks now to prepare for this program, and you found that Arizona has laws in place already to prevent or eliminate bullying. What are they?
So in 2005, Arizona passed its first bullying legislation. And this really required schools to adopt and enforce some procedures to prevent bullying on school campuses. And what's really interesting about the law is it doesn't say that it's illegal to bully. What it does say is the acts that make up bullying, so intimidation, threats, that's what's illegal.
Now that was 8 years ago, and since then the state has enacted another law a couple of years ago, I think you found in your research, about cyberbullying. Tell us a little about that.
So when it comes to cyberbullying, the laws that are on the books is House Bill 2415. And this includes intimidation, threats, harassment via electronic technology. And there's been some criticism when it comes to this law because a lot of people think it's too vague to combat cyberbullying. And this is because Arizona's schools and school districts are really left to decide how they define cyberbullying and how they handle it. So it's not a really black and white issue. It's not clear. What this law does is it does lead to some stricter procedures when it comes to reporting and investigating bullying, but some critics say that it doesn't adequately help people that could be currently bullied at the time.
Your research spanned what's going on nationally, but we focused on Arizona. What did you find about Arizona in terms of where it fits in nationally as far as legislation that goes after bullying?
So Arizona is not at the forefront of anti-bullying legislation by any means. There are some states that have stricter laws when it comes to cyberbullying, some even making it, criminalizing it, making it a misdemeanor for people who are under 18. We are making some steps in the right direction. Something really interesting that I found was, according to the U.S. Department of Education, Arizona is one of 5 states that limits jurisdiction over bullying behavior to acts that are committed using school licensed or school registered computers. So that's something that's very unique to the state of Arizona and something that is kind of questionable to some people.
So a student using his personal cell phone or some other device that's not belongs to the schools isn't covered by the law?
It's not actually covered by the law. There could be disciplinary actions taken, but the law does not specifically state that.
Just a few seconds remaining in that time, Samantha-Jo. You're a college student. Have you ever been cyberbullied?
I think we've all experienced some form of cyberbullying, whether it's someone posts a status or sends a text that they think is funny or lighthearted, but actually could be really offensive to other people. I think a lot of times it's accidental or unintentional. And I think people need to remember that before they send questionable messages or anything that they post online.
Samantha-Jo Roth, University of Arizona School of Journalism senior and an intern for Arizona Week. Thanks for that report.
Thank you so much.
As Samantha-Jo said, cyberbullying can occur almost without thought. What is cyberbullying and what are its effects? I spoke with Professor Sheri Bauman, who directs the Counseling Master's Program in the University of Arizona College of Education. You've written and researched cyberbullying in addition to conventional bullying. Tell us what the difference is between the two.
Well, cyberbullying is really an extension of traditional bullying using the available digital technology. But because of that, there are some distinct differences that I think make it much more dangerous. For example, if you scrawl something on a bathroom wall, it'll be seen by patrons of that particular restroom. If you put it on someone's Facebook wall, it's likely to be seen by hundreds, if not thousands of people. So the size of the audience, think of the things that go viral on YouTube, make the humiliation seem unbearable. From the victim's point of view, everyone in the world now has seen their humiliation, and that's extremely difficult for someone. Another feature that's, I think, easier to do in the cyber environment than in the traditional environment is to be anonymous or to appear to be anonymous. So if I attack you anonymously, I say some inappropriate or slanderous or vicious things about you, and you don't know who said it, that can create tremendous anxiety because it could be a stranger, but it could be the person sitting next to you, someone you see as a friend. You don't have an opportunity to defend yourself. You don't have a way to evaluate the source and decide, are they really credible, or there's someone that I care about.
Cyberbullying can affect anyone with a cell phone, anyone with access to a computer, with other electronic devices. But what primary groups, if you know, does it have an impact on? Is it teenagers?
Teenagers and young adults, possibly because they engage in more forms of technology. They don't all, but a great many have smartphones, which is essentially carrying their computer in their pocket. They use a variety of social networking sites, not just one. So they're more vulnerable in that sense. And because they're still developing an identity and maybe a little bit more vulnerable in that sense. And we know that the harm from this behavior is severe and can be long-lasting.
We know that bullying, whether cyberbullying or traditional bullying, is a problem at schools, among adolescents, teenagers. Is cyberbullying allowing it to be extended more into the adult world as well?
Again, I think some of those behaviors existed before, but it now may be easier and more harmful. Bullying in the workplace is not a new phenomenon, but can now be conducted technologically and with all the attendant problems that that brings. I sometimes get concerns about seniors who are the fastest growing users of some of these technologies, but may not have the sophistication for how to use them, and they can be pretty vulnerable as well. So really, it's a lifespan issue.
And the book you've written is designed initially to help school counselors cope with the issues of bullying, cyberbullying specifically, but it also has a lot to say to the general populace. What are a couple of key things that people should know they need to be doing to minimize or even eliminate bullying in society?
I think they need to know that this is a serious problem with lifelong consequences. It's not a trivial rite of passage that we can say, oh, it's just growing pains, the person will recover. We now, because in the last 30 years there's been systematic research, know that in fact those problems are lifelong in many cases. So it deserves our attention. We also really need to understand what goes on in the cyber world. We know that youth are very reluctant to tell adults about bullying in general, but particularly about cyberbullying, because they expect adults, first of all, not to know what they're talking about. You know, they're uninformed, they don't see them as able to help, and they think the adult solution is likely to be, well, this technology is causing you so much problems, let's just take it away. And youth don't make a distinction between their online social life or they conduct their lives technologically. That would be social ostracism for them. So we need to, as adults, let them know, A, that we recognize that these problems are not trivial, it's important, and we're willing to do what we need to do to get informed.
Do we have adequate legal tools to deal with the issue in Arizona?
Arizona's law is missing some key components. One of the things about cyberbullying, the 2011, I think it was, the revision of the law inserted a phrase about bullying using electronic communications technology on school computers and so forth. So they restrict the school's jurisdiction to school computers and school technology. We know that the vast majority of cyberbullying does not occur on school computers. They have their own computer in their pocket. And so by saying the school has no authority or jurisdiction over bullying that is initiated off campus or on personal devices, even if it causes a substantial disruption in school, or even if victimized students are upset and unable to learn, the way the law is written, they have no authority to intervene in those cases, and I think that's unfortunate. And it also, it talks about disciplinary consequences and reporting. It doesn't talk about education. There's nothing in the law that suggests that school personnel need to be educated about bullying and cyberbullying and trained in how to respond. There's nothing in there that requires schools to implement prevention programs. So I think while well-intentioned, it's missing some key components that might really make a difference.
A longer version of Professor Bauman's interview is on our website, azweek.com. School is the front line of anti-bullying, with many approaches to it. Mary Montaño, principal of Sunnyside School District's Summit View Elementary in Tucson, says she reinforces positive behavior. How much of a problem is bullying at the elementary school level?
I don't think that it's a huge problem. I will tell you that we are very aware and we are very proactive in trying to prevent bullying. I think the main form of bullying many times is name calling or maybe excluding friends from a group, from a game. But on our campus, I don't feel that it's a huge problem at all.
And do you see it become more of a problem as children get older?
I think peer pressure definitely plays a role in that. I worked at the middle school for a year, and I think cyberbullying, I think peer pressure, I think the need to fit in. Sometimes our friends, even our closest friends, will bully us into doing things that perhaps we know are not the best choices, but we do them because we want to fit in.
Talk about your prevention strategies in regard to the students enrolled at Summit View.
We run a very strong PBIS program, and PBIS stands for Positive Behavior Intervention School-Wide System. And we really try to capitalize on catching our students making great choices. So we have expectations for classroom, we have expectations for the hallway, for the bathroom, for the cafeteria, and we are very explicit about these are the expectations in all of these areas, and when you are behaving appropriately, we notice. We hand individual individual pause to students, and it's like a monetary system. We have a class recognition, that's a golden pause system, so any educator that sees a class behaving appropriately is awarding them a paw. When they earn 10 of those, they have a free dress day, which they love. We have our security monitor that when they follow playground procedures, line up as they're told to do, and are very hands-off and very respectful of one another, he awards them a golden paw. So we really try to create a culture where we are going to focus on the positive things that you do, and we're going to reward you for that.
Childhood behavior starts at home, or misbehavior perhaps starts at home. How do you draw the parents into your strategy for it here at school?
First of all, we have a student handbook, and in our student handbook, we address and we put in all the pieces that we have at Summit View to make parents aware. to ask them to join our cause in terms of if you have a problem, please come speak with us. We highly discourage any type of physical aggression. Sometimes parents are very aware that their child is being hurt, and because perhaps they feel the need to defend them in their absence, they also may encourage for you, well, if he pushes you, you push back. We ask them to please not do that and to come speak with us so that we can assist the child in terms of making decisions for now and forever. You know, we don't push each other in our society. We can't do that. That becomes assault later on as adults, and we try that education piece from now to, you know, for until they leave to middle school, obviously.
You've been a teacher and an administrator for the last 18 years. What have you seen in the way bullying has evolved in that time? Is the situation getting better? Is it degrading?
I think we are more aware, and I think we are more purposeful. And sometimes because you are more aware, you catch it immediately, and so therefore it could be interpreted as, well, now there's a bigger problem than there was before. I don't think that it's a bigger problem. Again, I just think we are more aware, and we are more cognizant of making our students or assisting in their feeling safe at school, feeling safe about the adults, and being able to speak openly with them.
The nature of human behavior, childhood behavior, and the nature of bullying may dictate that some bullying victims would never come forward to say that they were being victimized. How do you approach that?
You know, we have, again, through our strong PBIS system, we really talk about the bystander and the student that is watching and perhaps not reporting. And we talk specifically in our bullying assemblies to that person, to say if you are witnessing, you are just as guilty as the bully, because you're not being a voice for someone else and you're not advocating for them. This year we implemented a theme for our school year, and we went with teamwork, one for all and all for one. And teamwork stems in academics and in behavior. So if one of your peers is being hurt and you don't report it, that's not being part of our team. So let's talk about, what does that mean? That means that we stand up for one another and that we report it when they won't report it themselves. I feel that strongly that we don't have a lot of victims on our campus that are not sane. We work really hard on establishing rapport with our students. At the very first beginning of the school year, and in January we'll do it again, we dedicate the first 2 weeks to what we do our class councils, we set procedures, we have class goals, data and behavior, and we really do a great job of executing and being very purposeful for setting rapport with our students.
Tell us a success story, whether it's at the level of a child or at the level of a system that helps reduce or even eliminate bullying.
I think for Summit View, a definite success story is our school reform model. We have a collection of educators that come together every 2 weeks, once every 2 weeks, and we refer to them as a cooperative culture group. And they keep a pulse on being proactive about anti-bullying, of being very active about the programs that we have in place. Like I mentioned, the PAW system, the golden PAW system on the playground. We collect data. We share our data with our teachers and say, this is in the areas that we have most problems now, and what are our plans for that. We talk about root causes. We talk about next steps. We have a SMART goal set for that. So I think a success story for Summit View is definitely that we are very purposeful. We have a group very cognizant of the fact that we want to prevent bullying on our campus, and we take steps to make sure that that happens.
Professor Bauman said Arizona's anti-bullying law isn't as strong as it could be. Here to discuss legislation over anti-bullying is State Senator Steve Farley, Democrat from Tucson. Thanks for being with me, Senator.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
You co-sponsored anti-bullying legislation last year. How did that come out?
Yeah, I worked with Republican Representative Ted Vogt on this one, and it's one of those bipartisan things I like to work on. The main issue and the reason why I was supporting it was because electronically, bullying has become a bigger issue. The more that text messaging has become common, in many ways harassing texts have taken the place of harassing phone calls. We already had phone calls which were on the books as being a harassment crime, but we didn't have anything for texting. So the prosecuting attorneys came to us and said, we need to do something. We're losing cases against people who are attacking and harassing, verbally harassing people. We need to have a law. So we worked and got that in place. There were some legitimate concerns raised early about how this might infringe upon civil liberties. should people have the right to flame people online? And the final version that passed ended up having a sort of a compromise with that, saying that if it's directed at multiple people in a public forum, then that wouldn't be prosecutable.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. Free speech versus do people feel threatened? Where do we draw the line, and can we really legislate that?
It is a challenging issue. I think those of us who are legislators, we're used to being trashed in public a lot and trashed in private emails. And
Journalists, same way.
Exactly, and we're often threatened by people, sometimes in pretty bad ways. But we choose to put ourselves in the line of fire, so to speak. When we get into this job, we know that people are going to attack us because people feel pretty strongly about public policy. I think that's an encouraging part of our democracy. I wish they wouldn't be uncivil in doing so. But that doesn't mean I would be outlawing anything that is in that type of discourse unless they're personally threatening violence against myself or my family. So you have to be careful in that case. Private citizens, on the other hand, don't choose this line that we are in voluntarily. They don't choose for somebody to harass them. They're domestic violence situations in which there is real danger from harassing texts, harassing emails, attacks in electronic form. And we need to be able to protect those people especially.
So what more needs to be done legislatively? Is there more that you expect will come about in 2014 or farther in the future?
Well, I'm going to continue to follow the lead of the prosecuting attorneys, county attorneys, city attorneys, who will be telling us if they're running into cases in which people are being harassed needlessly, adolescents who may be being harassed and then potentially doing harm to themselves. We're going to find out if they're running into trouble with the existing law and whether that needs to be strengthened in some form. And I think there will be some appetite to do that in the legislature based on the success last time.
During the debate last year, you mentioned on a number of occasions that we just need to be more civil in society. And I don't think anyone can disagree with that.
Yeah.
But saying it and bringing it into practice in society are two very divergent things. What would you suggest that we as a society do to be more civil?
It's hard to enforce civility on other people, but one of the things we can do as individuals who want to see a better climate for discourse is to model a different type of civility ourselves. We can show when we're having discourse, even about things we feel passionate about, we should do it in a civil fashion. We should disagree with the policies, not disagree with the person. And that's something that we can do. And I think I would argue, based on what we've seen from Congress and their inability to do anything except yell at each other, that we have an obligation as public officials to show a different way of working together, a different way of people operating and disagreeing and coming to a compromise, even though we might not share the same opinions.
State Senator Steve Farley, Democrat from Tucson, thanks for speaking with me.
Thanks for having me.
A project called End of Bullying is driving many of this month's activities in Tucson. Jenny Grable is here to talk about what's on tap. Ms. Grable is Executive Director of the Fund for Civility, Respect, and Understanding. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
The Fund for Civility was founded by now Congressman Ron Barber in the wake of the January 8th, 2011 shootings as his way of responding to it. The End of Bullying project has become a project of that. How did that come about?
Well, it was a group of volunteers coming together, and Ron actually specified that bullying was one of the issues that he wanted to work on with the Fund for Civility. And so a group of community advocates and experts and leaders came together and wanted to start a project that brought the community together on this issue.
A lot of activities underway this month for anti-bullying efforts, and we'll talk about those in a minute. But first, what are the project's goals and how are you doing in moving toward those?
So the project is really focused on connecting those in the community that are working towards the common goal of ending bullying, preventatively and with intervention. So what we do is we try to foster a network between those that are working in the area and then also share those resources with the community. So kind of be a clearinghouse, information and referral, and a connector in the community, as well as providing leadership around the issue. issue.
And it's an ongoing issue, so it's not something that will end at any time, we suppose, right?
Well, we wish it would, but likely, it's an issue that we'll deal with ongoing. And we try and look at bullying as an issue across the lifespan. So we work not only with youth, but are also doing some projects that focus on adult behaviors as well.
So tell us about some of the activities underway in the community this month.
So on October 10th, Thursday night, we have a screening of Submit the documentary, The Reality of Cyberbullying, which is focused on cyberbullying and youth and parents and educators. We're going to have one of the filmmakers in town and an expert panel following the screening. Again, that's Thursday,
At
October
the Loft
10th.
Cinema?
Yeah, at the Loft Cinema at 6:30 p.m. We also have our monthly task force meeting that meets every third Thursday of the month. So on October 17th, we'll have a meeting and we're going to learn about Roots of Empathy, a successful program out of Australia that works towards building empathy and ending bullying. We also have a workshop specifically for mothers and daughters at the YWCA on October 19th that's about sexual harassment and bullying. And then we are doing a workplace bullying event on October 24th with the Center for Community Dialogue. We are wanting to open a discussion in our community about what workplace bullying issues we are facing, and then hopefully create some action items that we can work on to help with that situation as well.
And information about all of these activities is on your website, which is?
endofbullying.com.
And we will put a link to that website on our website so that people can connect to it from the story about this program.
Thank you so much.
Talk a little bit about that workplace bullying. What kinds of things should people be looking for in regard to that?
Well, it's just about this initial project is to get a gauge of where we are in our community. We talk so much about bullying in schools, but bullying in the workplace can affect everything. If a parent has a bad day in the workplace, the way that it trickles down and it affects our whole community is so detrimental to our well-being. So it's really about looking at our community as a whole and what we want to do is bring people together in that event to talk about where we are with the issue, and then ideally identify some action steps that we can take towards ending, as we're always talking about, and the end of bullying. So ending that in our community, or at least providing a space to move from, so that we're educated about where we are and where we can go in a positive direction.
Jenny Graybold, Executive Director of the Fund for Civility, Respect, and Understanding, and Overseer of the End of Bullying Project. Thank you so much for speaking with me.
Thank you for having me.
That's our program for Friday, October 4th, 2013. Next Friday, how Arizona nonprofits are doing in the current economy. For Arizona Week, I'm Michael Chihak.
Production of Arizona Week is made possible in parts by a grant from the Stonewall Foundation and by the members of Arizona Public Media. Thank you for your continued support.